Hi, everybody. It's so amazing to see you all here. I hope you've been enjoying the convention so far this weekend. My name is Nia Havens. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a student at Western Washington University. I'm also one of the YDSA national co-chairs. I'm so honored to be here with our amazing guest speaker. Since 2014, Sara Nelson has served as the president of the Association of Flight Attendants. However, she's been a member of this union since 1996 with 50,000 flight attendants. With her leadership in AFA, she has led the union to 18 different legislative victories for workers, including a 2-hour minimum legal rest security campaign to ban knives and weapons from places for fellow workers safe on the job. She also works with local union leaders as the chief spokesperson and administrator in order to make sure their voices are being heard on a national level. All across the country, women are less represented in unions than men, and Sara has led women to join unions all over the country with the message, join unions and run unions. This has inspired women all over the nation to not only join their local union, but also become leaders in labor. She is passionate about the labor movement and believes flight attendants have an important role to play in the future with more access to public contact and travel to every corner of the world. We are so honored and excited to have Sara speaking to us today and inspiring the next generation of union leaders. I'm going to give her a little bit of time to talk to us, and then we're going to have a section for Q&A where you all can ask some great questions. Thank you, Sara.
Yeah, thank you so much for the intro, and thank you for having me tonight. Thank you to all of YDSA. You guys are doing amazing work out there, and let me just say that DSA on the whole, putting the PRO Act out front is so important. This was a huge game changer in terms of getting people to understand what the PRO Act is. And let me say that this is a set of power demands that you are supporting, and a sustained way for working people and people outside of the corporate elite class to actually be able to control, run our country, be part of a democracy, and shape our future. So organizing around that is critically important. The vast majority of people are hurting out there in this country, and they're looking for answers. And you are giving them a way that they can gain power. And whether we fully achieve the PRO Act in the near term or not, having those clear demands, organizing around it, and helping people understand what they should expect from their government and from their employers is a critical part of building power. So as Nia said, I'm Sara Nelson. I'm the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am a proud union flight attendant for 25 years. I started way before flight attendants should. I'm not exactly eligible to be a member of YDSA, but this is what I will say. The only way that we are going to build the labor movement, the only way that we are going to build power for working people, the only way that we are going to save the world for all of you and my son is if young people are taking the lead. And so it is an incredible honor to speak with you tonight. I appreciate you asking an oldie like me to come. I can't help but lift up enough how important it is to be here. And I want to tell you, my staff said your schedule is too full for you to be able to do this event. They told me that I did not have time for this, and probably I didn't. But I said, no, this one I'm doing. So we are here because you guys are really important. And it is important to, take a look back and see where we've come from, because I know that I am standing on the shoulders of women who fought through incredible discrimination in order to form our union. They formed the union in 1945. It was one of the first places that women could go and work outside the home. And build a life for themselves. We had to do things like negotiate in our contracts that management would sign as a co-signer on leases, because we couldn't even rent an apartment as a woman. And everyone expected us to be married to be able to do that. So these are the kinds of things that we had to push through and fight through incredible sexism and fought to end age, marriage, parenthood, and appearance requirements, fought to expand LGBTQ rights. We won some of the first domestic partner benefits in our contracts, and that was necessary to set that standard and to start pushing forward. And the one thing I really think is important for us to understand is that, okay, we're a bunch of socialists on this call, but we're living in a capitalist state. And so the reality is that we have to build power from where we are. And when we fight in our workplaces and we require capital to come to our demands, what that does is it actually brings capital to our side and helps build power. Because when we first negotiated that in the United Airlines contract, they fought us. And then they joined us because they didn't want to have to be the only ones having to pay for those benefits. And this month, I'm almost kind of disgusted, but I'm both disgusted and sort of gleeful to read in the In-Flight magazine about how proud they were that they were the first airline in the United States to provide these benefits to LGBTQ workers. And of course, it's only because the union was there. None of this would ever have happened if it wasn't for the union there and working people standing together and standing up together. My first week on the job, a flight attendant of 35 years pulled me aside and she said, listen, management, they think of us as their wives or their mistresses. And in either case, they hold us in contempt. Your only place of worth is with your fellow flying partners. And if we stick together, there's nothing we can't accomplish. So that was my first week on the job. That was a lot to take in. I took it in as much as I could at 23, fresh out of company training, but it has rung true for me throughout my entire career. And it has come to mean more and more throughout my entire career as I see the results of solidarity. So, there was a viral tweet a few months ago that said, kind of a bummer to have been born at the very end of the fuck around century, just to live the rest of my life in the find out century. And so I just want to say that to all of you, so sorry that I grew up in the fuck around. And now I'm talking to all of you in the find out. But you know what? It's not just about find out. We know what's coming at us. We know what incredible existential threats are coming at us if we don't get organized and build power together and change them. And so that's what your convention is about. That's what your commitment to each other is all about. And really, the next generations really depend on what you do now. So there's a lot at stake. And, if we stick together, there's nothing we can't accomplish, as my flying partner told me. And you have a ton of potential power. And together, Gen Z and millennials make up 40% of Americans today. Think about that. I mean, just imagine that. Imagine if all of millennials and Gen Zs were voting together and voting for your future. Imagine if you were not just voting, you were voting and taking action every day for your future and holding people accountable. And, because you came up in the find out century, as the tweet so eloquently phrased it, you have an understanding of those fights that people in my generation and older can't possibly understand, can't possibly take in. So your voices on this are critical because it really matters. It really matters to everyone around you. How will you ever pay down student debt? Will there be good jobs when you graduate? Or will Amazon and the gig economy swallow it all up and take away the ability for anyone to organize to make their lives better? Will you be able to afford homes? Or will they all be bought up by hedge funds and nobody can do anything but rent in housing that becomes less and less affordable where we live and work? Will your votes matter? Will we make strides at the end to end systemic racism? Will we act in time to prevent the climate disaster? So it can be very hard to think about building power, and voting is important, but it's far from enough. Now, I've dedicated my life to the labor movement from the earliest days because I know the real kind of power that that can build for people. And I also have been in a lot of boardrooms. And I have to tell you, these people do not have the corner on smarts. And they do not actually have power. They are terrified of us. Terrified of us. We're the ones with power. As Mother Jones said, the corporate elite, or the capitalists, say there's no need of labor organizing, except that they themselves are continually organizing shows their real beliefs. The capitalists want the most labor for the least amount of money, and the labor wants the most money for the least amount of labor. We make all the value in this world and build the world's palaces, but we neither spend the money that we create or dwell in the world's palaces. If we would only understand that we hold the whole solution to the problem in our own hands, for if every industry were to hold up and simply stop working, the capitalists would capitulate to all of our demands, because the world could simply not go on. Now, there's a lot of really great Mother Jones quotes, and I paraphrase that a little bit, but that one to me says it all, because the capitalists, the corporate elite, they are always organizing. They're organizing for the next crisis. They're organizing for how they can extract more from us. And in fact, as much as we would like to think that we do all these different jobs in mines and hospitals, in the air, on putting in cable, we think that these are different jobs, and so we have different experiences in life. But the truth is that when I stood out on the GM picket line, as those workers were on strike against GM, the stories that I heard there were the same exact stories that I would hear in a flight attendant local meeting. They're making us work harder for less, forced overtime, can't control our schedules, can't control when we're home with our families. It's on us to get to work, all the costs of that, the transportation, our time, all of that is extracted from us. Identifying some workers as worth less than other workers just because the business definition that management gives them, rather than recognizing the value of that work for what it is. And of course, healthcare. We have, every time we go to the table to negotiate around our entire contract, we spend 3/4 of our time talking about how to cap the amount of costs that will be shifted to workers for their healthcare, and how to keep the coverage that we negotiated long ago. And when we go out on strike to try to fix it, management uses that over our heads. Or when we decide that a job is not worth it, we can't quit because we can't afford to lose our health care or lose that for our family as well. So all of these issues are connected, and there is no difference between these jobs, but we have to understand that the only solution to it is solidarity. And solidarity is a force stronger than gravity. And you scientists out there love to say, it's the weakest force. Okay, yeah, you try to jump up and see if you stay up in the air. I'm sorry, but it binds us together. It's incredibly strong. And it allows us to do things that we can never do alone. So when we come out for each other, when we come out for another fight, like the nurses in Worcester right now, who are on strike more than 100 days for safe patient staffing. They're not striking for more pay for themselves. They're not striking for their own personal needs. They're striking to be able to do their jobs, to protect the community, and to protect all of us. And guess what? They're up against hedge funds who are buying up hospitals and trying to extract all the costs from them to put them in their pockets and to make us pay for more and more, including with our lives. These nurses in Worcester, we got to come out for their fight. And every time we come out for someone else's fight, we understand our own fights better, and we're able to connect the issues better. We're able to organize better. And the labor movement is a place where we can have sustained power. Because as we know, if there were a general strike and everyone stopped working. The demands that we have on the table at that moment in time, we probably can get. Puerto Rico went out on a general strike only 2 years ago, unseated a governor. But did they get lasting change? Did they fix the problems in Puerto Rico? Did they really use the power that they generated with all those people in the street? No, it got dissipated. And the hedge funds came back in and continued to take over, and they continue to do that right now. So we have to have lasting power, and we have lasting power through our unions. And our unions are only going to be powerful if we are organizing in the millions and setting the reality that the labor movement is for everyone. The labor movement is not a handful of international presidents who work in offices in DC. The labor movement is every single person who goes to work, who does any kind of work. And that includes changing diapers at home. So we need to recognize, and we need to spread the word that this is where the power resides. And when we come together and we have that legal standing together that is lasting, we can build something that no one can deny. I think it's really important for us to recognize that we have to fight for this everywhere. So a lot of times what we will do is we will challenge the people who are the closest to our ideology and hold them accountable for their actions. And what we're doing when we do that only, is we're abandoning all the people who have terrible representatives today, where we have said it's impossible, for example, to organize in the South. Impossible. It's not impossible. People have been left stranded. We got to go have their backs, just like DSA did with the Amazon workers who were organizing. And just because we didn't win that election when the company did every single thing to violate the law because there's nothing that's at risk for them, don't think we didn't build power in that fight. Because the fact that we were willing to fight shows them that we're willing to fight again. And I always say, it's really important that we continue the struggle, because when you don't struggle, you lose your strength. You lose your muscles. There is no such thing as labor peace. There's always going to be a fight. There's always going to be the next fight. When we were fighting to save our pensions at United Airlines, this story kills me. It was a huge battle. And we took a strike vote. We were fighting in the courts. We were fighting on Capitol Hill. We were fighting in the streets. And the issue that kept coming to the top, it was this huge existential fight. Were we going to be able to afford to retire? It was going to change our professions forever. It was going to hurt the people who were close to retirement. Huge, major issue, right? And at the same time, what we were hearing from members was that management was out telling people that they couldn't wear comfortable shoes. They couldn't wear shoes that were outside of the uniform guidelines, appearance guidelines. This is in the middle of the bankruptcy when United Airlines, in some cases, was holding the airplanes together with duct tape. And they're giving flight attendants a hard time about the kind of shoes they're wearing. And so I wanted to say to the people who were complaining about this, because it was something that they could hang on to, right? It was something that was right in their current experience. It was something that they felt that they could complain about and do something about. And the pension issue seemed so huge and out of control. The bankruptcy was out of control. Everything was out of their control at this time. And they would come with this complaint about management's giving us a hard time about the shoes. And I'm thinking to myself, fuck the shoes. Put on your comfortable shoes, get on the picket line, let's save our pensions. But you know what we did instead? I swallowed that. And instead, we put together a petition. We made specific demands of management. We organized around the fucking shoes. And we got them to change the appearance standards so people could wear comfortable shoes without being harassed. And we had all of those people know that the union heard them, heard their issues, cared about them, engaged them on what they cared about. And then when we said, show up now, for our pensions. They all came because in 24 hours, we asked them for the very first online hearing, congressional hearing, to submit their own testimony about why they needed to save their pensions. And we got 25,000 stories in 48 hours. And that was real power. And that was a part of forcing, at the time, Senator Barack Obama to be the mediator with United Airlines, call them to the table and double the amount of the retirement plan that we negotiated instead without paying for that. We generated real power. I mean, I'm talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that they had to pay in addition because we fought. So it's really, really important that you are out there talking with people, that you're raising up voices, that you are not, dismissing some of the smaller fights, because winning those smaller fights gives people confidence that they can win in the bigger fights. And it's important to have those wins along the way while we have our clear, big demands. So as you're organizing around the PRO Act and you are organizing to make sure that working people don't have hurdles in the way to be able to join their unions and build their power, lasting power, as you have those demands, make sure that you also are coming out for the nurses' fight, and you're coming out and you are engaging in your schools with the unions that are at the university, and you're asking them what their fights are and coming out for their fights. And you're organizing with wherever you are around the issues that matter, because as people start to learn the power of people taking action together and they get a taste of that, they're never going to look back, and they're more likely to be engaged in the next fight. So you're building power every time that you do that. Now, I want to really hear a lot about what you have to ask tonight. I'd love to have more of a little discussion. But the other thing, too, is that we have to, every single day, think about one thing, at least one thing that we are going to do to have someone else's back. And as we do that and people see that other people will come out for them, and as you exercise that muscle of standing up for someone else, you're going to be more likely to be able to stand up for yourself too. And you're raising expectations, and you're giving people the example of what people standing together can mean. So I would like you to just look around. I don't know if you're there with anyone because we're in this virtual reality, and but look around. If anybody can hear you, maybe they're in the apartment next door. I want you to, at the count of 3, scream at the top of your lungs, "I've got your back." Okay? I mean it. Picture a person if you can't see them. Make sure they hear you. 1, 2, 3. I've got your back. Everybody take yourself off mute right now. One more time. 1, 2, 3. I've got your back. Right on. Okay. All right, Nia, let's have a discussion. I'm really glad to be with everybody tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really amazing. I know I learned a lot from that. So yeah, I'm gonna ask a few of our pre-written questions, and then we'll be able to also ask some questions from the audience. Remember that if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function, and I will get sent those directly so I can ask them. So the first one I'm gonna go with is, you talked about how young people are a really important part of the labor movement for the future. What advice would you give to young socialists who are hoping to go into union jobs once they graduate?
Okay, so, well, first of all, come be a flight attendant. But no, listen, we are 6% organized in the private sector. And as much as it's important to be organized also in the public sector, what I talked about in the beginning about bringing capital to the fight, if we're not taking on the corporations who right now are controlling our politics, controlling the politicians, and have limitless amounts of money to keep that control. Remember, they have money and control. They don't have power. We have the power. So you may not be entering a workforce that is unionized. You may be starting the union campaign at your work site where you're going to build a new union and build the labor movement. And I think it's extremely important. First of all, whatever you're going to do, you should do some research. Are there unions in the industry? Are there companies where there already are unions? Are you willing to go work at a company that doesn't yet have a union there? I'll give you the example of becoming a flight attendant. You can go have a union contract at almost any airline, but not at Delta Airlines. So are you going to go get hired at Delta and join our campaign to get a union there and help build the contract? It's really important to look at that. And one of the things that you can do in those industries is where contracts exist, even if the union doesn't have a very large presence, usually the union contracts are setting the standard for the industry, usually. And if the percentage of union workers in that industry is not very high, probably the standards for that job is not very high. But that means that we have to form our unions and negotiate those contracts. And those are lasting. Those are in black and white. And there is law that requires the corporations to have to respond to that once you get your union. Now, of course, if we get the PRO Act, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to do this, to organize. But if we can really get into the consciousness of young people that unions are the answer, and that, by the way, unions are not some third party. It's the people in the workplace who join together to form their union and simply have a way to stand toe-to-toe with management. And you should be able to do that. The most fundamental way to talk about this is there is not a single corporate executive who would ever take a job without a contract in place. They would never do it. They would never allow that for themselves, and we should never accept anything less for ourselves. But it's not going to be a single one-on-one contract with these corporations. It's only going to happen through collective action and collective bargaining. So you've got to join together with all the people around you.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we're all super inspired to go join a union now. I know I am. The next question is from an audience member. So as we all know, climate change affects every person in this country, but also affects workers all over the country. As a labor leader, what can you do to combat climate change, and what can we do as socialists to help combat this just all-consuming threat to the world right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is an existential threat, and the only way that we are ever going to build power is by building power with people who are interested in saving the environment and people who understand what it means to build good jobs. The corporate elite have really kept control of this by making us think that we're at odds with each other. And the initial environmental laws that were passed, in most cases, were used as an excuse to shift good union jobs to non-union job sites. So that is certainly why you see the visceral response often from, for example, mine workers who know what this has looked like for them. They were some of the first environmentalists in this country. They took on the coal companies long ago about how they were poisoning the water that their children are drinking. And yet, when it just became about saving the earth only and not recognizing that we're saving the earth for the people on it, then we lost sight of what we needed to do to protect the people who may be affected by any changes in how we are saving the environment. So the only way we're going to do this is if we do this by a whole coalition. And, I think that has really broken through. For example, Sunrise does great work around this and really understands that if you're telling people, get over it, your job is dead, you have lost before you started. Because they have to provide for their families. And what do you think they're going to choose at the end of the day? What's right in front of them, or the threat out ahead that they don't think they have any control of as an individual person? The only thing they have control of as an individual person is whether or not they can have a roof over their family's head and food on the table. And so it's really, really important, first and foremost, that we build power by standing together and coming out for each other's fights. That's not why I did it, but it was a benefit of the fact that our union made it a priority to stand up for the mine workers' pensions. And the mine workers know now we've got their back. And so when I talk to them about getting into the conversation about the climate catastrophe and what we need to do to actually build a true just transition, and they need to get in that conversation, they are in that conversation now. They've started that. They started that a month ago. And that was a huge move and a big change, because just the recognition that this is coming and that they have to engage in the fight is enormous. And we have to keep building that. We have to keep bringing people to the conversation. But here's the other thing that I would say about it. You know, we know what we need to do. We know the kind of demands that we need to make. We have not built the kind of cohesive power. The potential power is sitting there, but we haven't built the kind of cohesive power to be able to get the changes that we need in time for them to be made. And so how are we going to build that power? How are we going to make these demands relevant to everyone? If we build our unions, it's the one place where we get to have conversations with people who are not self-selecting being in the same space with us. If you think about it, everything outside of unions is a self-selecting group. And so you don't have different ideas, and you allow I call it the 4Ds of the union busters: the divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. And the first three lead to the fourth one. Divide, delay, distract leads to demoralize. And then people give up and they don't fight, right? And so how do you fight against those things? You bring people together around common demands. And in a union, when you build your union, you can't count on a 50% majority to be successful. If you're going to strike and you're going to hold the employer accountable, you got to make sure that you've got at least 90% of the people on the same page. And so there's no way that 90% of the people in the workplace come with the same ideology and the same beliefs. But if you bring people together around common demands, and they understand that they have that in common, and they understand the common fight, and then they come out together and they start hearing each other's stories, then all of a sudden we're not so divided. And we start to understand who we're fighting for and what we have in common. And that builds power. And then that is the space where we can have the conversations about the climate demands. So it starts with talking about shoes, and it moves to the bigger, more existential fights with the very clear, broader demands that all have to mean something to us, and we all have to have a stake in. And so those demands also have to include, of course, a just transition and good union jobs as we build this new green world. Did I lose you now?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, that's okay. That's okay. We can do that. So yeah, I do think it's really important that we recognize a couple things, okay? We have talked a lot about striking, and we need to talk about striking because the strike was made into a bad word, but there is no collective bargaining without the strike. I often will say that management, in order to deal with us fairly, we either have to beat it out of them or they have to remember the beating they're going to take to deal with us fairly. And so that means that when we are trying to get results, what we have to do first and foremost is define the problem. And when we hear from the people around us and you have meetings and you organize around the issues that people care about, you're defining the problem because people are talking about it and we're fully defining it. And we're defining it, sometimes we're defining it by also bringing science to that or bringing experts to the conversation and defining it over and over again so that people actually understand there is a problem. Because nobody wants to fix anything if they don't understand the problem exists, right? And then from that and from those conversations and in those union halls or in that workspace where we're all coming together, you set your demands, because the demands are clearly coming out of that space where people are talking about it. And when you set demands that people care about and they've defined themselves, they're more likely to fight for it. And then you add urgency. You add the urgency to the issue. We fought this past year for our payroll support program in aviation, and we saved aviation jobs. And we required the airlines to have to keep people working. We said in the law that they cannot reduce people's hourly rates. And we capped executive compensation and banned stock buybacks. And we got that because of the urgency of the moment. We set our demands up front. We set the agenda. We said we were at the core of this relief. We were at the core of the solution for the problem of the airline industry collapsing all of a sudden with coronavirus. And if airline management still wanted to run airlines, they were going to have to come to our demands, which included capping their own pay and banning stock buybacks and dividends and giving us all of the money. So that urgency of the moment has to be there as well in order to get results. And then you have to be willing to back up the demands by saying what you're willing to do. And maybe that's just make somebody's life a living hell, like picketing outside of their private home every night, stalking them at every restaurant they go to, whatever it is. Or maybe it's going on strike. And so we have to be able to say the word strike because it's a critical part of the collective bargaining process. Everyone is putting something on the line with the strike, right? For management, if the strike happens, their business stops. For workers, if the strike happens, they're not getting a paycheck during that strike, right? So everybody's got something at stake. And that's the way that we support collective bargaining, because people have to do what they weren't willing to do before those conversations started. And people have to understand the consequences if they don't come to agreement. So anyway, find the problem, set your demands, add urgency, and back it up with what you're willing to do. Hi, Nia. Welcome back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. The hard life of Zoom, the Zoom world, but we're back. So yeah, that was just amazing. So inspiring to hear. I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. I'm glad that we got to get to a few questions. I think we're going to close out, but I just like to remind you all that our social is starting very shortly, and I urge you all to go to that. There's many different options. Sarah, maybe if you'd like to say just a couple quick words before we head out, I think we'd all love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 big strikes happening in our country right now. The nurses in Worcester, Massachusetts, look it up, do everything you can to help people understand this fight, because they are out there fighting against Tenet Healthcare, who's based in Dallas, buying up hospitals, and the other healthcare conglomerates are asking Tenet not to settle. So what they're trying to do is get replacement strikers so that they can knock out the bargaining unit, knock out the collective bargaining agreement, and also continue to cut nurses in the hospitals so that people can't get the healthcare that they need. This is a part of fighting for Medicare for all. This is right now because these healthcare companies are trying to retain all the profits, all the control, right? So look up Massachusetts nurses, the St. Vincent's strike, and help lift it up all over the country. Let them know that you've got their backs. The mine workers in Alabama who mine coal that makes steel, okay? This is not coal for energy. This is coal that's used to make steel. So I want to be clear about that, first of all. But they go 2,000 feet underground. There was a bankruptcy 5 years ago where Warrior Met cut that contract. I mean, just eviscerated that contract so that the miners have no control over their lives. I talked to miners down there who had 4 days off last year. When you go into a mine to work, you don't see the sunlight, but you definitely don't see your kid. And you can't go home on a lunch break. You can't get away. They have no control over their lives, and they're not making a living wage. So that sort of sounds like the coal camps from 100 years ago. This is a very important strike. And this is, again, a company that is controlled by fucking hedge funds. Okay? and so our labor is getting funneled to Wall Street unless we stop it. Two really important strikes that you can come out for right now, learn about them, look up the mine workers, look up the Massachusetts nurses, learn about that, get involved, have their backs. And let me just say, this ante will show up anytime for all of you. So I am just very, very grateful for you. Remember to spread the word that unions are for everyone and that young people need to join unions and run unions. And it's the only way that we're going to save our world. So love you all. Hope you have a great convention. And thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It was wonderful to have you. I'll see all of you at the social. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, guys.